Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of uh, classes studying the Haftorah of the week. Um, we will study the Haftorah and also use this as a way to discuss the current situation in Israel and finish with some Tehillah. So before we start, I just wanted to give an ultra brief review of what the Haftorah is. Interestingly, I learned in my preparation that there's no clear consensus on why we started reading the Haftorah. The option that feels to me like it resonates the most with today, which is the one I learned while I was growing up, is that in times of difficulty in the Jewish world, where the reading of Torah was banned, there was an opportunity to sort of skirt the ban by reading the Haftorah instead of the Torah portion. So, in the times of King Antiochus in 168 BCE, right, they were forbidden to read the Torah, and so this was a substitute. It seems that is not a likely, actually a correct answer, but my guess as to why it is the prevailing answer is that it is satisfying at a time like this, right? At a time where maybe you're in your miklat and you don't have a Sefer Torah and you can pull out your Tanakh and read a piece of Navi, there's something comforting to that idea that there's a resilience, right? We couldn't read from the Torah in 168 BCE, but we could read from the Navi. And that feels like it's a wonderful way to skirt that terrible law. Another explanation that go ahead. Does someone have something to say?
No.
Oh, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch suggests that the Haftarah was actually about like an infighting issue, fighting the influence of sects in Judaism that thought that the Torah sort of finished at the end of the 5 books of Moshe, and they wanted to broaden the canon to include Nevi'im and Ketuvim. So I think either one is possible. Obviously, it's a little unclear, but it is a very old tradition. And I think that if it brings you any comfort to think of it as a defiant act in times of war, that's a beautiful thing to hold on to right now. However it got started, the Gemara in Megillah spends a lot of time talking about which Haftorah we read at what time. So I'm going to share my screen just to share this little piece. Most of the Haftorot connect to the Parsha in some way. And then the rest of them have to do with the Chag that is preceding it. So something interesting is that this week we're in a very niche area of Haftorot because the Gemara in Megillah says, right, if Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat, that you read the Haftorah from Yeshayahu, because the Haftorah starts with V'haya midei chodesh b'chodsho, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, right? So it mentions Rosh Chodesh, and so we read from that piece of Yeshayahu. However, we are not celebrating Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan on Shabbat, but on Sunday. Chal lihiot be'echad b'Shabbat, right? If Rosh Chodesh falls on the day after Shabbat, Me'etmol maftirin vayomer lo Yonatan machar chodesh. Right? We read the Haftarah that says, Yonatan said to him, which is to David, that tomorrow is the new moon. So it's a very nice tie-in to a story, but it doesn't actually have a lot to do with Rosh Chodesh per se, right? Not the way that Yonah has to do with Yom Kippur, or Chana's tefillah has to do with the first day of Rosh Hashanah, right? It's not a content tie-in. It's almost more of like a cute tie-in, right? It's the same day. The day that we're reading about in the Haftorah is the same situation as the day that we're reading the Haftorah. Yonatan was saying tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh, and we also are saying tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. So on the one hand, I think there's something like a little deflating there. It's not, the content is not the same as we might want it to be. But on the other hand, I think that it gives us a lot of space to find and make our own meaning on every Rosh Chodesh or any Rosh Chodesh, or the Macharat Chodesh, whichever time. So as I said, hopefully moving forward, we'll look at the Haftorah that time more into the Parsha, and maybe we'll explore that angle, or we'll explore some pasuk or something about the author of the Navi, the speaker, the prophet Yeshayahu or Yechezkel or whichever prophet it is. But today I thought that we would read it on a more pshat level and see what sort of comes up for us. I think the story is resonant with today's news, broadly, not just today. Any questions before we dig in? Okay. So,
Rabbanit,
oh yeah, please, Sherry.
I might be bringing the group back a step, but it turns out that my question with my question, but I was wondering, like Moses and God wrote the 5 books of Moses. Who wrote the Haftorahs?
Really, really great question. And we can dig into like all that nuance as we go through the books, because I would say the answer is different at different times. So maybe I'll pull up. Can you guys see my new tab? I never know what you can see when I'm sharing my screen. I think you can see this. The Navi is just a very quick word about the Navi, which is spans a really wide frame of time. I'm just pulling up the Sefaria window to show you. Let's see. So in Tanakh, right, there's the 5 books of Moshe, which, as Sherry said, are, we believe are the word of God, perhaps written down by Moshe. And then the Navi spans from that very end of the 5 books of Moshe through much later in the history of the Jewish people. So from Yehoshua, from Joshua, through Shoftim and Shmuel Aleph, which is where we're reading from, Shmuel Bet, Kings 1, Kings 2, that is a story about the people of that time. There are prophets, there are kings, there are lots of different players. Then comes a string of prophets, both minor and major. So Isaiah through, gosh, I should have done a little more review of this myself beforehand, but Isaiah through somewhere in here, maybe Amos, I think, are the major prophets, and then there are 13 Trei Asar, minor prophets, 3, 4, 6, 11, 12, 13, that deal with even post the major prophets, right? So you can see here that they're actually very helpful little summaries of each story, right? That these are the messages of the prophets. So by and large, we believe, right, that Tanakh is written, made up of the word of God, but we know that Yeshayahu or Yirmiyahu or Yechezkel, Yael, Obadiah, that they're speaking in the prophets that they wrote. So as I said, some of them are more popular than others for Haftorahs, and we can really dig into a little bit more about who the prophet is and how and when we think that work was sort of codified and canonized and all of that. Shmuel Aleph comes relatively early in the cycle of Navi. So Yehoshua, right, is pretty much immediately after Moshe dies, how we enter the land. Shoftim is the beginning of our time in the land as a people, post entering the land. Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet tell the story of David HaMelech's ascension to kingship. And how that happens. So here in Shmuel Aleph in 20, we're already fairly far into the story. And so just for those who are not familiar or for whom it's been maybe a long time, the story begins where David is chosen by the prophet, by Shmuel, the name of the Sefer, and anointed as the next king. And he has to contend with the current king, Shaul, who is not happy that David is perhaps making inroads to be the next king, because Shaul actually has his own child, Yehonatan, who perhaps should be the next king. So there has already been a lot of drama between Shaul and David at this point. But interestingly and beautifully, this is a beautiful story of friendship, Yehonatan and David are very, very close. And so there comes a point right before this where David meets up with Yonatan and says, listen, your father is trying to kill me. We need a plan. I need to escape. And Yehonatan doesn't want to believe it at first, right? I think one of the things that has come up a lot as I've been listening to people and watching, right, are the challenges of narratives, right? And Yehonatan is stuck between two people, his father, whom he has some allegiance to, and his very closest friend, whom his soul loves, as the text tells us. And so finally, it gets to a point where Yehonatan says to him, right, as this is why we read it on Machar HaChodesh, right? Machar HaChodesh, v'nifkadeta ki yifaked moshavecha. And I think this is the first place I want to stop for a minute, for two reasons. One is that when the next day will be the new moon, it is the absolute darkest point in the month, right? Because the moon is waning, and then it will wax bigger again, and by the 15th of the month, it will be a full moon again. And in fact, when we bless the new moon, we mention David HaMelech's reign. There's something that ties David HaMelech to the moon. And I think that a piece of it is sort of about the waxing and waning of history, the darkness and the light that we see throughout cycles of history. This is a very dark period. For me, hearing tomorrow will be the new moon, it really hits home in like how dark today feels, not just physically, but in the world and in Israel. And I want to hold on to how dark it will be throughout the story, because I think it will make a difference. And to also like maybe put in our minds that we know there will be a waxing of the moon again. And the second thing is this very interesting word that repeats twice here. Nifkadata, right, is from the root pakad, to count or to be missed, or to here, right, you will be missed. Ki yifaked, same shoresh, but means a slightly different thing, right? In one place it means vacant, and in one place it means like noticed, missing, right? Remembered and forgotten maybe are two sides of that same word, nifakad. And I think that here, I mean, certainly that idea is so poignant. When Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi of England, passed away, and they put up his matzeva, someone said this at his funeral. They referenced Shmuel Aleph, and they said, your seat is empty and you will be missed. And there are so many empty seats right now, so many people who are being missed. And this idea that Yonatan is able to give voice to Yehonatan, to this tension between remembering and forgetting, being forgotten, and our job to remember, I think is again a tension that we might want to bring with us as we keep going. But I just laid out two big, heavy ideas. So if anyone wants to react or reflect, I'm happy to stop. Okay, so the scene is this dark, dark day right before the new moon, and Yehonatan is suggesting that David not show up, right? There's a big meal to celebrate Rosh Chodesh, and Yehonatan is saying, well, if you think my father's going to kill you, don't show up, right? He says, go down all the way to the place where you hid some other time, and stay close to the Even HaEzel, the Ezel stone. And when Yehonatan sort of makes heads or tails out of what the climate is in the room with Shaul, he says, that I will shoot 3 arrows to one side, as though I was trying to hit the Even Hazel maybe, and I will order this boy to go and find, my helper, my servant, to go find the arrows. Right. And here's the code, right? If I say, Im Omar Amar Lanar Hine Hachatzim Mimcha, right? If I call to the boy, hey, the arrows are on this side of you, be reassured and come out, for you're safe, as the Lord lives. But if instead I say, hey, the arrows are behind you, then you should know that you're in grave danger and you have to go away. So there's a scenario in which David HaMelech is a soldier hiding in a field, right? Again, a very painful image as we can reflect on today's climate. What does it mean to be hiding in a field in the darkest of moments, waiting for some kind of message to be received? And Yehonatan echoes hhis promise that they have made together, Yehonatan and David, right? Soldiers in arms, maybe, right? Thinking together, that they will always sort of be true to each other. So David takes him at his word and he hides in the field. And that is like, maybe I would say, the first scene, right? We have a very dangerous time, anxious high tension time where Yehonatan is serving as an ally to David against his father, hoping though that in the end he'll be able to come and say, the arrows are on this side of you. David will be able to come out. Everyone will be able to be together. Okay. Now we're going to move into Act 2 of the story, right? And Act 2 is when Yehonatan returns to the palace, the kingdom. El Halechem Echol, right? So Shaul comes down to his feast of Rosh Chodesh and he sits down to eat and he notices who is not there, right? Nifkad, who is V'yefaked Makom David, right? David's seat is empty at the table. And so he asks in a very derogatory way, he asks here, sorry, I'm just finding it in the Hebrew. I seem to, Nishal David, like Kafam Pam al Hamoshav HaKayar Ve'akam Yonatan. I'm sorry, I skipped forward. So he notices he's gone, and then he notices that but he thinks maybe that David was not ready to be at the table. Maybe he was impure. He needed to go to the mikvah. But on the second day, he notices it's gone. The place is empty again. And here he says, why didn't the son of Yishai come to the meal yesterday or today? Right. And son of is like kind of a mean way of saying it. He should have said David, right? But instead he pushes it in this sort of rude way. And Yehonatan answers Shaul, and he says, Nishal David me'imadi ad Beit Lechem. Right, something came up, and he had to go to Beit Lechem. Vayichar af Shaul b'Yehonatan vayomer lo ben avat hamardut. Right, he really, if we thought son of Yishai was bad, he says, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Right, he says, I know that you side. Halo yadati ki bocher ata leven Yishai, right? That you side with him over me, to the shame of your own mother, right? He's really, Shaul is letting it out on Yehonatan, probably because he is super insecure, right? He feels this threat from David, and now that threat is extending to his very own son, Yehonatan. And he says, for as long as the son of Yishai lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure, right? He's saying it's not just me, it's you that should be worried when David is sort of poking around trying to do this. Now then, have him brought for me, for he is marked for death. Right? This is a very strong thing to say. And it seems to be that at that point, Yehonatan sort of realizes, wow, this was not in David's mind. This is real. He was really at risk. And so Yehonatan speaks up and he says, what did he do? Right? Lama yumat, ma asa. What has he done that he should be put to death? And at that, Shaul throws down his spear to strike him down. And Yehonatan realizes his father was determined to do away with David. And Yehonatan rises from the table in a rage. He eats no food on the second day of the new moon because he was grieved about David and because his father had humiliated him. Right? So imagine being Yehonatan. Your best friend David is complaining that your dad wants to kill him. You go to all this trouble to reassure him to make this good plan that, he'll be fine. And then he's so embarrassed, both because his father calls him horrible names and says mean things about him, but also because he realizes that David was right. So Act 2, Act 1, I would say, is David's sad time. It's dark. He's alone. He's hiding in the field. He's hiding from Shaul's men. Act 2 is Yehonatan's sad time. He feels left alone, betrayed by the person that he thought would be with him at that time. So then we come to the final act. And here I also want to sort of dwell a little on the current situation. So in the morning, Yonatan goes out for the meeting with David, with his helper, his servant, and he says to the boy, run ahead and find the arrows, right? He's setting up the scene, which only he and David know about. The servant is actually an unintentional actor in this story. He's just following his master's commands. And when the boy comes to the place where the arrows shot by Yehonatan had fallen, Yehonatan calls out to the boy, "Hey, the arrows are behind you," right? That is the code. Right? The arrows are behind you is the code that actually David should run, right? He should run away. V'yikra Yehonatan acharei hanar meherach husha al ta'amod, right? And it seems like he's speaking to the boy, right? Quick, hurry up, don't stop. But you could imagine that when he's yelling that, he's actually talking to David, who he knows is out there listening to him, right? So David hears the code. Just in case he got the code mixed up or he doesn't want to believe the code, he then hears Yehonatan call, quick, hurry, don't stop, run away, right? And to be David at that moment, knowing that he was right, knowing that he's about to lose both his friend and his place at Shaul's table because he has to run away, must have been a very terrifying moment. I don't want to ever presume that I could be Melech David, but were I David at that moment, I would imagine I would hurry up and I would not stop and I would run away, right? Because he was so scared that he insisted that we set up this plan. However, when the boy goes away, David emerges from his concealment, right? He could have just run away immediately, but he waits until the boy collects the arrows, takes them back to Yehonatan, goes back into town, and then he emerges. He wasted an enormous amount of time, and he flung himself on the ground and he bowed low 3 times. And Rabbi David Silver has a beautiful question here. He says, what's the point of the arrows anyway? Why didn't they just have a code? If I don't come back by this time on this day, leave, right? Or why didn't Yehonatan just take a walk in the forest, and if he shot 1 arrow in the air, David should run away, right? It seems like there might have been an easier way to do this. And what Rabbi Silver suggests is that David really, he didn't want to believe it, right? He knew that Shaul was coming out to kill him, but he didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to realize how much Yehonatan would have to stick out his neck for him and how much the king really wanted to kill him, right? How much Shaul really wanted to kill him. And so actually this moment just allows him to come out and say thank you to Yehonatan. If the code had been something different where Yehonatan wasn't there, right? If I don't come, don't come out, he wouldn't have been able to say thank you. And so it's not really about the arrows, even though it's a long, complicated story. It's about his being able to come out and say thank you to his co-conspirator, to his co-soldier, in arms here. And it's actually quite a moving scene, right? He bows low 3 times to thank him, and then they kiss each other and they weep together. David wept the longer. And to have to know that you're really saying goodbye to someone, right, I think is a very emotionally draining experience. And Yehonatan says to David, go in peace. I don't know. It seems like I apologize. It seems like the Hebrew got abbreviated in some way. Let's see. V'yishku ish et re'ehu, right? They kiss each other. V'yichbu ish et re'ehu, and they both cry together. Ad David higdil, until David cried more. And then the Hebrew that seems to be missing, right? Yonatan says to David, go in peace. We have sworn together, right, between you and me and between your offspring and mine forever. And so David leaves hoping that they will meet again, which is not, it does not come to be at the end. But Yehonatan does save David's life to the point where he is able to become king. So I think that this story, when I first saw that this was not the regular Haftorah, I was a little bit disappointed. I wanted it to be connected to Bereshit and to the story of new beginnings. But I actually think a story about our darkest time, where we feel like our kingdom is threatened, where we feel like we only have one friend who is so dear to us in the world, and otherwise we're all alone hiding outside, feels very, very much poignant and resonant to me. So I want to open the floor to talk about the storyline or any of those sort of points of darkness and hiding and friendship and gratitude, and talk about this or about Israel, really whatever people are here for. I'm here with you.
I had a quick comment just about the fact that there have been so many stories that have come out about the initial attacks and how many people truly sacrificed themselves in the spirit of saving as many people as they could. And we just saw that time and again, even before you started to see the army really showing up on the scene. The people were there for each other and that giving each other a chance to run away. That's what it reminded me of when you were talking about this now.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really beautiful, right? And I could almost imagine Yehonatan playing that role for David. And I appreciate you saying that all the more because I think that in the world of Tanakh, we think of David as the brave guy, and Yehonatan is important, but he becomes just sort of like the assist to the kingship. But what you're saying, Alana, right, is like Yehonatan's bravery here is so immense. If his father had seen him out there with David, it's easy to imagine that I could imagine what you're saying, that Yehonatan would have stepped in front of that soulmate brother, however we want to think about that deep friendship, in front of him and saved him. And that is really powerful. I agree.
I had one thought
Please.
as you were narrating the Haftorah. Looking at the king who lost his mind, he could not make a cool, rational judgment. He was throwing despair on his son and all the things that he was saying. And I was thinking of the current situation in Israel. I don't want to make it, this is not a political statement.
Sure.
I'm just hoping and praying that our king, our prime minister, does not lose his mind, that he can use his mind objectively given the situation. Was he responsible in creating this situation, all this crisis that's been going on? He already made a statement like a tshuva kind of thing. Our crisis, our internal differences are over. Let's all get together and forget about our fights. Or maybe it's a glimmer of reason that he may be showing. Maybe not. I just pray that he can be an intelligent, rational, lucid, honest king.
Mm-hmm.
That was what looking at Saul's antics reminded me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, right, the lack of stability, the instability that brings to his table, to his Rosh Chodesh table, right? It's hard to imagine the king getting up and throwing a dagger and calling his own son names at a Rosh Chodesh Su'udah, right? Like a Misibah for the new moon. And I agree. I think we feel that instability in the story, and we feel that instability in real life. As you said, not in a political way, but just in an emotional context. I 100% agree. I was also thinking, Alana, about Yehonatan maybe as like a reservist. I have a cousin who was just called up to serve at the northern border, and I'm thinking like he wasn't a soldier at that moment. David already like was in soldier mode. Yehonatan is like in son of the king mode, and he has to flip so quickly to be able to do that, which I think is difficult and also courageous in its own right.
I also have been feeling so much just this one coming out of bed right now, but like gratitude for how safe our children are and the fear that I've been feeling so much for the children who are in harm's way right now. And everybody who is obviously, but it's really, yeah.
Hi, hello.
Very grateful for what we have, but davening all the time, obviously, for what's missing.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna go take her to bed, but thank you. Thank you.
I
want to hear what everyone else is saying.
I find that certainly resonant as well. Yeah, Sharon, please go
I
ahead.
just so something you just said sparked some thought for me, and I've always found the whole Shaul story, very poignant,
Hmm.
because you're watching somebody lose their mind,
Hmm.
and the pressure, the emotional distress of a child watching a father, not just that he's attacking you. I mean, there are all these complicated feelings, but to watch, especially now, with so much going on with an increased awareness of dementia, and people sandwiched, sandwich generations, and the thought of having to live with this and watch this, and here you have somebody who has the power of a king and he's losing it, and it's just very very poignant. I think it's very, very sad, very hard for Yonatan to be caught in that middle, where this is a person who is clearly going nuts, but in the meantime he's very dangerous, but in the meantime it's his father.
Yeah.
So I have no definitive statement. I just it's
Yeah. Yeah. I think the role of dutiful son becomes so complicated there, right? In some ways, I think
just the son, it's your father, and to
yeah.
watch him be like this,
Yeah. Yeah. Again, destabilizing, right? The person you're expecting, presumably Yonatan is at least in his teenage years, right? The sort of stable king of Israel seems to be gone. And in his place is some other guy who looks like his dad and probably sounds a little like his dad, but isn't there. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Very destabilizing. Sherry, did you want to share something before? Did I cut you off?
No, I'm listening.
It's maybe
So I
too much
actually would like to call. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to call back. Nelson, I think you're the one who was just talking about leadership. Every time we talk about, throughout Torah, we talk about leadership, talk about all the kings and why we shouldn't really be having kings, but okay, you can have a king. And I just think that personally, I've always, especially over the last few years, as you read Torah each cycle, and then you see who the real world leaders are today and how they may live up and may fall short, it's just an enduring lesson. It truly speaks to the ages, that it's just, these are lessons that just have never gotten obsolete. They still ring true. And it's just unfortunate that so many of our leaders haven't done enough Torah study and haven't written their own Torahs, and about how they shouldn't have so many horses and all that sort of thing. It's just, I just find it to be a resonant, continually resonant lesson.
Yeah. And it's interesting because at this point, David is still on the upswing, right? He hasn't been swayed by too many wives or the power that he has to acquire more wives, or right, any of the blood on his hands from all of those things. And yet we see him fall prey, not in the same way as Shaul, but to a lot of the same things you're mentioning about the sort of corruptive power that we see. Yeah. No one is totally immune. Elena, what were you going to say before?
I guess it was taking it in a little bit of a different direction, but I keep hearing, well, I haven't heard too much from the other side, and I'm actually a little bit grateful for that in some ways, but also like there's a part of me that wants to maintain my humanity, at least consider the other side, sort of. But like when people talk about the Arab nations as our brothers, and like this phase that we're entering into, where we really are on opposing sides of this, and that it's just not negotiable. There is no discussion anymore. It's not happening anymore. At what point are we, what feels like brother, sister, and what feels like my enemy? And like, at what point does Saul get so steeped in his own mind space that he can't see that David is also his nephew, son, brother? At what point do you become so desensitized to your own humanity that you can't sense the humanity in another person, that you could commit this kind of atrocity? And like what it must have been like for even potentially other Palestinians maybe who didn't want to go this route. I don't think militarily we really have the space to be able to consider that, but there's still a part of me that wants to. So I don't know. I don't know how far to go with that thought, but it's there for me, so I wanted to share it.
I think it's really, really powerful. And I'm glad you took us there. You know, another direction to go in this parsha is an analogy between Yehonatan and David and Yaakov and Esav. When Yaakov and Esav meet again after all of the drama, after all the things that lead them to feel like less like brothers and more like enemies, right? When they meet again, it uses the same verbs of weeping and kissing. And so there is a feeling that maybe that parsha and this parak are playing off each other in some way. And here is like a place where it went better, right? For Yehonatan and David, not as you said for Shaul, but I think I'm really with you, right? I feel like sometimes it feels like going there makes you fall off the edge. And again, like destabilizing, right? You lose your truth there. And I think that Shaul was probably stuck in that, right? Once he got his truth sort of firmly stuck in his head, there was no moving him. And it's dangerous and it's hard. And, Ravari said in Shul over Simchat Torah, when there was the Kol HaNa'arim, he said, we sing Hamalach HaGoel to protect our children, whether we're in America or in Israel, in Shul or in a bomb shelter. And then he paused for a moment and he said, or in Gaza. And I saw several women cry all the harder at that moment. I'm sorry, Lynn, like you are, to say like, yes, right. That's right. We want all children in the world to be safe, and we are all linked together. And so it's painful to watch what happens in the real world and in Tanakh when things start to fall apart there. 100%. I'm really glad you brought us there. Thank you. Judith, it looked like you also wanted to, oh, Tamar, yeah, go ahead. And then, oh, but you're muted, Tamar.
Read of the, as I read and hear, we were talking before about mental illness, about Shaul was losing his mind, was sinking into insanity. And when I think of the present time, the headlines and the stories of the savagery, I find myself looking for, when I hear of crimes by individuals who are going to be punished by the state, I think, but this person is clearly insane. How can they talk in terms of punishment? He needs treatment. He needs to be put away from society because he's dangerous. But to punish a person whose mind is sick. But when I hear about the barbarity and the savagery that's being perpetrated, how can I call such a large group? Can they all be insane? But if they're not insane, how do I account for their capability, for being capable of perpetrating such awful acts? I can't say they're crazy because there's too many of them. If it was an individual, I'd say this man is, or woman is clearly insane. What do I do with this? What do I do with this? That's my question.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Please.
I was thinking this goes back in the Torah. There is an entity called Amalek. Amalek is not insane. Amalek is evil. Amalek wants to destroy Israel, probably destroy God, and they will do into any lengths to do that. And what I see on television today is Amalek in action. We're going to forgive, understand, treat, therapy, Amalek. You can't. I think Amalek must be destroyed. Evil must be destroyed, pure evil. I think this proves there is such a thing. And I was thinking another story for Alana. I think that will make you feel good. I read in the news today that the IDF Arab language outfit had a message to the Palestinians, to the population on Gaza, saying, we are going to destroy a building that harbors Hamas headquarters or some operation, and please leave so that you don't die. And this is where you have to go, and give directions. Go to this street, to this place, to a United Nations refugee center where you will be safe. So my thought was, with enemies like this, who needs friends? This is the reverse of the usual expression. So I think that it gives you a clear idea of good and evil fighting each other right there in one piece of news. And I felt very proud of the IDF.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I learned on CNN today that that's called knocking on the roof. And it's something that Israel does very often. It has not done the entirety of this war. And when they were judged harshly by, the public opinion, the general said, I don't see Hamas ever knocking on our roof. And I think that you're right, Nelson. I think we can often be very proud that even in times of difficulty, we do try to find the humanity, but I hope that people left, and I hope they followed the directions, and I hope that, for me, thinking of the Gazans as sort of separate from Hamas is very helpful in finding humanity, because I think, right, they are not in control of Hamas, and they often don't have the same sentiments as Hamas do, but it can be very, very hard. And I think, Tamar, what you're saying is very resonant, right? If all of Shaul's army had joined with him to root out David, sort of not just following Shaul's orders, but doing it on their own, we might have said the same thing that we're saying about Amalek, right? Like, that's an evil that has spread through the kingdom, even though it is still led by that same one person who has this really weird mental illness, or, as Bonnie was hinting at, maybe dementia or some aging, disease. And so it's very hard to separate those strands out. Very hard. Judith, I see you managed to unmute yourself.
Well, just quickly, about the notion of there being no dialogue and no one to speak to. One of my intentions while I was in Israel was to communicate with some of the interfaith peace groups that I follow and am aware of, and I got to go to several meetings, which were very interesting. And it just so happened that the two that I attended were led by Muslim members of the groups who were devoted to the two populations working together and so on. I mean, there's a lot going on the ground, is what I'm going to say. And I find it a little bit disappointing that all the news coverage and the emphasis on supporting Israel, which is incredibly important, talks about the Jews and the anti-Semitism involved, pointing toward the Jews, without one mention of all of the Arab and Muslim populations who are also Israelis, who are going to be suffering. It's their people too who are dying, and I'm not even talking about Gaza. Just, one little mention would have been really nice, considering how many people, both in Israel proper and the territories and so on, are really working at this and trying to make a go of a better form of dialogue than weapons. So as far as the dementia goes, and what's happening with Shaul and the attitude toward David, wow, I think post-COVID, where so many people are stressed and suffering from paranoia of different kinds, and I mean, real or imagined, I think we can perhaps develop a little more sympathy now than we could have in the past. It's really easy to get into that ruminative frame of mind and not be able to get out of it.
Mm.
The question is, how do we address that? And part of that mentality is the result of war, where you can't see who you're fighting and so forth. And whether it's viruses or people we can't understand, every time we get into another war, we have another generation who've been sensitized, oversensitized because of their war experience. And we have another generation of their children who can't understand their parents who are behaving in crazy fashion. Thinking of my uncle with post-traumatic PTSD, that wasn't even a word back then. And it took 30 years for my cousin to figure it out.
Mm.
You know, so here we go again, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. You know, and I wish that we could say that this Shabbat would be our darkest day of this waxing and waning cycle. I think we all know that it is likely not. And so thinking of a promise of a waxing moon might feel unhelpful at this moment, right? We know that David's moon waxed full maybe faster than ours will now. But I think that looking for that hope is one way to sort of change our mindset, to change our frame of mind, like you were saying, Judith, right? War can sort of lock us in, and maybe keeping our eye on that new moon that will hopefully wax again soon can be a message of hope. And also remembering the importance of that double meaning of the word pakad, right? That there are so many empty seats and that we have to remember and count them and be present. I read recently that it will be overwhelming to bury so many people in Israel in the coming days and weeks, right? That often so many people come to each Levaya because it's so important to honor the dead, and how could you do that 1,000 times in such a short time period? And so I think that remembering will have to keep going for many weeks and months and years. I said to Doug Klein over Yantif that I found his Yom Kippur memory session to be very uplifting. I wasn't able to be there for most of it, but to think that in 30 or 50 years, I might be standing in one of those people's shoes and saying, I remember where I was in Skokie Valley when I heard Israel was under attack. And now I'm able to look back and see us in this point of great triumph or of great turmoil or whatever it is, right? Because it's not like we were so safe on Yom Kippur. The inner turmoil was worse than the outer turmoil, but that there's waxing and waning in this world, and that if this is a dark moment, may we see the light very soon of a new moon. So I would like to finish with
And not
I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, Judith, please, as I share my screen, go ahead.
And not waste it. That is, to make use of the light the next time we see it.
I mean, 100%. So we'll read Tehillim Kuf Kaf Aleph, and I put it up here for anyone who would like to see. I'll read it, and everyone can repeat. You can unmute or keep yourself muted, however you prefer. And I hope that in weeks to come we'll be ready for a new kind of Torah, but until we're not, this Torah will be here for us, and we'll use the Haftorah as works for us, as a space to process. Okay. Shir Lamalot, Asa Einai El Haharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri.
Shir Lamalot, Asa Einai El Haharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri.
Ezri Mi'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz.
Ezri Mi'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz.
Al Yitain Lamot Reglecha, Al Yanum
Listening to this beautiful
Ezri Me'im
song.
Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz. Oh, I'm sorry.
Look to the
Al Yitain Lamot Reglecha, Al Yanum Shomrecha.
ייתן למתוקך ינו וישמרך.
הנה לא ינום ולא
Wait, are
יישן.
we on the screen right now?
שומר ישראל.
הנה לא ינו ולא ישן שומר ישראל.
אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך על יד ימינך.
אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך יד ימינך.
יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה.
יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה.
אדוני ישמרך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך.
אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך.
אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
Thank you guys for joining me. I hope to see you next Tuesday, if not before.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you so much.
easy week. I'm here if anyone ever wants to chat.